too good.
Oh, it's live stream now. Got it.
Excellent. We are live as of now, and I'm going to share the link.
Amazing. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Kendra St. Cyr, and I'm the Communications and Fundraising Coordinator here at Elizabeth Fry Toronto. We're so excited to be joined by Dr. Patrina Duhaney for today's discussion in partnership with Women Act. So Elizabeth Fry Toronto and Women Act recently launched a community-based research project, that aims to improve access to services and supports for racialized women with experiences of criminalization and trauma in Toronto. So this project goes really nicely with Dr. Duhaney's research, her article titled "Criminalized Black Women's Experience of Intimate Partner Violence in Canada." Dr. Duhaney, would you like to introduce yourself and give us a little background about your research?
Sure. Thank you so much, Kendra and Jessica. It's nice to be speaking with you this afternoon. So I'm currently an assistant professor at the University of Calgary in the Faculty of Social Work, and currently teaching undergrad and graduate students. And so I'm really excited about this research. It's something that I did for my PhD and work that I've continued. So current studies that I have going on right now is looking at Black women's experiences with the police in Alberta. Also looking at the experiences of anti-Black racism at the University of Calgary, and looking at ways in which we can integrate critical race theory into academia. And I am currently working with the Calgary Police in terms of informing their anti-racism strategies. So we're super busy with those different projects. But I'm excited about this research, and it was certainly made possible by the 25 women who agreed to speak with me, and I'll be sharing some of their stories in terms of what they shared with me when I interviewed them. And so really this research is based on those women's experiences, and this research occurred in Toronto, so really relevant to our discussion this afternoon. So I'm going to pause there because I'm sure you have plenty of questions for me, and I will certainly elaborate as we go on.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so one of the things that I noticed in your research, you talk about mandatory charging and prosecution policies were implemented in the last years for people experiencing intimate partner violence. And I know the hope of this was to remove some of the responsibility from victims to press charges, increase reporting of assault, and reduce reoffending. However, it's actually resulted in significant consequences for women, specifically Black women. Can you please explain how this has impacted racialized communities?
Yeah, certainly. We've certainly seen an increase in the number of individuals being charged with domestic violence related offenses since the implementation of mandatory arrest charges. we have seen an increase for both women and men, but women have certainly been impacted, predominantly in particular racialized women by these laws. And so, the over-policing already of racialized communities has certainly complicated their experiences. And like you said, the purpose of these these policies were certainly to protect women. Scholars have referred to what has happened as unintended consequences, right? Because where police, they've gone into a domestic violence situation, and in that moment, they have to determine who's a victim and who's the offender, right?
Yeah.
And so we know that that binary thinking does not necessarily work really well in domestic violence situation, because it's not black and white when we have domestic violence situations. And so while the law was intended to be, a positive thing, it's certainly been criticized by scholars because women largely have been impacted and who might not even feel protected to call the police should they require those supports.
Yeah, of course. It's definitely a downfall. Yeah, as you said, an unexpected downfall of this new policy. And in your research, you also highlighted the need for improved research and practitioner responses specifically, and policies which respond better to the needs of criminalized women and Black women's intersecting identities of class, race, gender. What are some of the unique vulnerabilities that increase racialized women's risk of intimate partner violence?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. So we know that there's certainly that gendered component, right?
Yeah.
The fact that women are women are at increased risk of experiencing domestic violence, but there's that racialized component as well. And when we layer that with the women's intersecting identities, that certainly complicates their experiences. And so when we look at Black women's experiences, there are a number of different factors that we need to take into account. Some similarities with all women is that women are at risk, and the statistics show us that women are more likely than their male counterparts to experience domestic violence.
Yeah.
However, complicating that is we have pieces around class and gender and race and so forth, education, and use of substances and drugs, and how those complicate women's experiences. For Black women, there are several themes that were reoccurring in my research. And so certainly when I look at Black women's experiences, I must look at the systemic barriers, right?
Yeah.
How do systemic barriers complicate their experiences? So we know that there are individual factors, there are community factors, but there are also systemic barriers. And so for women, some of these women, one of the recurrent theme was this community code of silence, right? And so that works a couple of ways, right? Whether it's because of the stereotypes that are often used to characterize Black individuals, negative stereotypes in particular, such as Black individuals being more violent. And there are also stereotypes about what what relationships look like in Black families, and what Black families look like in general, right? And so because of these negative stereotypes, that certainly impacts the ways in which families engage and interact with each other, right? So sometimes women's families, whether it's the church, the communities as well, that may say, because of these negative stereotypes that are attached to Black folks, if you're experiencing domestic violence, keep it to yourself.
Yeah. It's a lot of like hush hush.
Yeah, keep it to yourself. And so it's not about the condoning the violence, but what happens if the police intervene. When the police intervene, they tend to arrest Black men. They tend to treat them harshly, right? And statistics show that there's a high percentage when we think of their relation, when we think of the small percentage Black individuals represent in the larger population, they're overrepresented in the criminal justice system, right? Yeah. And so those are certainly factors that, you know, if we're calling the police, they already have these negative stereotypes about who we are and what our families are all about. So they're more likely to charge, right? And so that's certainly a barrier for women, right? They have this code of silence that they have to worry about, and you know, worrying about their own protection, but also having to carry that burden of protecting their communities as well, because of how Black communities tend to be treated in the larger society, right? Certainly, there are other factors that we need to take into account, such as, you know, the role of substances, whether it's drugs or alcohol. And so from my research, women who were exposed or who use drugs or alcohol, or their partners use drugs or alcohol, they were more likely to experience domestic violence. And the severity of domestic violence was certainly greater for women who either used substances or their partners use substances. So that was certainly another reoccurring theme that came out in my research. And, you know, one of the other factors was, you know, when women, experience domestic violence, as I mentioned, that code of silence, and because of the ways in which Black communities are treated, oftentimes women did not report their experiences of domestic violence. So there was no record that their partners were indeed abusive and they mistreated them or harmed them in any way, right? So the silencing works in multiple ways, right? Because women are wanting to protect their partners because of how society treats them. They were less likely to call the police when they experienced abuse, right? And so there was no record, right, to substantiate women's narrative once the police intervened. So I'm going to pause there for now, and then I'll certainly expand on that afterwards.
No, thank you. And I really liked how you highlighted the whole idea of like protecting your partner, especially in the Black community, which is so unfortunate because like you want to reach out for help, but you're also thinking of the negative implications that would have for your partner. So I'm going to go to the next question. So you use the theoretical approach of critical race feminism to help inform your research. Can you explain a bit more about critical race feminism and how it helped deepen your understanding about the relationship between Black women's victimization and criminalization?
Yeah, it is really important for me to use critical race feminism, and the root of that is critical race theory. And so I'll provide a base definition of that first, and then I will certainly go into detail in terms of the relevance of critical race theory, which I'll probably refer to as CRF.
Yes, it's easier that way.
Yeah. And so critical race theory was developed by legal scholars because of the ways in which they thought there was this exclusionary practice around theorizing around the differential experiences of racialized individuals. And so they wanted to, these theorists want to really develop a theory that they felt better reflected their experiences and, you know, taking into account race, class, gender, and the various intersections. And so one of the reasons why critical race feminism was so important, it's because it forefronts issues related to race or racism and various forms of oppression. But it also recognizes that Black women's voices have merit, right? That what they have to say is important, and they are experts in their own lives. But another reason why it was a significant theory for me, it's because it allowed women to have those counter narratives or counter stories where they could counter those negative stereotypes about who they are and what they're all about. And so it gave women a chance to reauthor their lives and their life experiences and their life stories, and really tell their stories from their perspectives, as opposed to having the dominant narratives dictate who they are and what they're all about. And so that disruption was really important, disrupting dominant narratives and reframing those narratives. So it's certainly, truly reflective of their experiences. But there's that social justice piece as well, right? That it's not just about theorizing, but how, in addition to forefronting women's experiences, how do we work towards that social justice? How do we achieve social justice? And so that was really important. So really relevant to the work that I do.
Yeah, amazing. And I liked how you touched on the fact that it gave women, Black women specifically, the opportunity to rewrite the narratives about them, because so often other people speak to what they think someone might need and what they might want, but obviously you're your own expert in your life, right? So that's very important. And so my last question I have for you is, you pointed out that there was a limitation. There's a limitation towards the fact that there's little research on the subject matter from a Canadian context. Why do you feel Canadian research needs to examine Black women's experiences of intimate partner violence?
And so when I was doing this research, I was disheartened. I was disheartened because I had to rely extensively on US scholarship. And certainly I noticed a significant overlap between Black women's experiences in the US and their experiences in Canada. And so we saw similar themes, right? In terms of what Black women in the US were saying. So super important and relevant. However, we still have differences, right? And so that's why it was so important for me to do this research, to make sure that the research that we have is relevant for the women in the Canadian context. And so there are a number of different factors why we have limited data. The limited data, typically and historically, our Canadian government does not collect race-based data, with the exception of research on Indigenous people, right? And so we have extensive research on Indigenous people's experiences, women's experiences of domestic violence, and we can certainly see some similar themes there when we look at Black women's experiences. But that has certainly been a gap, right? The lack of race-based data collection, right? And disaggregated race-based data collection. So what the government has done, we have white women, we have Indigenous women, and we have racial minority women, and it's like, wait, but there are unique differences with women. So certainly there are similarities, but there are certainly differences. And so it's really important to have this research that looks at Black women's unique experiences of domestic violence, right? And how violence impacts them, and how it influences whether or not they will report experiences of violence, and even how they will be treated in the criminal justice system when they actually fight back against a partner who's been abusing them for a number of years. So I agree that this aggregated data on race and women's experiences of domestic violence is needed, and I can certainly say that the government is making some shifts in having this data. And so recently, in the last couple of years, we've seen statistics that looks at Black people's experiences in terms of the economy, their experiences in terms of education. We've yet to see the statistics that provide this aggregated data on their experiences in the criminal justice system and of domestic violence. So it's in the works, but it's really slow. It's really slow. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. And research like this that you've just completed is obviously so important for the Canadian context. So can you tell us, like, overall what your research is really telling us here?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, for one, the research is saying there needs to be more research.
Yes.
Black women's experiences. But the research is also saying, yes, when we look at Black women who have been, who've been incarcerated or who've been charged with a domestic violence related offense, we cannot just take this binary approach, Black, white, victim, offender. It's not black and white, and oftentimes women don't necessarily see themselves fitting nicely in this box of either victim or offender. But within the criminal justice system, that's how women are often classified, and it really sets women up, right, in a negative way. So what my research is asking us to consider is the complexities of violence in women's lives, right? Looking at the reasons why women may engage or fight back against a partner who has been abusive. The research is also encouraging criminal justice personnel to take a step back and really look at Black women's experiences, take that time to speak with them to find out what's going on with them, but it's also asking practitioners to make sure that the services that they're providing is actually relevant to Black women. And so when I talk about relevant services, I talk about, what I'm referring to is that we cannot necessarily have a homogenous workplace, where it's all white women and you expect racialized women to just go to you and just spill their guts. No, we have to make sure that whether it's management, the frontline workers, they're representative of the women that they're serving, right? And certainly the populations in Toronto and across Canada are changing. So we have to make sure that we have representative when we look at frontline staff and management. But we also want to make sure that frontline staff are certainly, they have the supports in place to do the job that they need to do. They are familiar with what is needed to support Black women, right? So it's really important for them to read research like mine, so they understand the complexities of violence in Black women's lives, but also, making sure that they have adequate training as well, so that they can provide those supports. Yeah.
Of course. And something that I actually saw emerging after the Black Lives Matter protests in 2020 was that there was more practitioners, Black practitioners advertising their services, because, as you just said, like a lot of places are homogenized. So it's hard for Black folks to want to go to those services and seek help if they don't feel like the person might understand where they're coming from. And before we close, just had one more question. What do you think is next for your research in terms of this topic?
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. And so another article will be coming out that looks at Black women's experiences with the police. And it really complicates this discussion even more. A third article that will come out shortly. Also, how do we do this research with Black women who've experienced domestic violence, who might be reluctant to speak to researchers or reluctant to share their experiences with frontline workers. And so I will certainly continue with this work because it's my life's work, right? In terms of how do we forefront Black women's voices? Because oftentimes their voices are silenced or their voices are excluded from the dominant scholarship. And if you look in terms of what exists, we see women in general, and then we have like little drops here where researchers might consider Black women or other racialized women's experiences. So it's really important for me to continue to elevate Black women's voices and their perspectives and really demonstrate that their voices truly have merit.
Of course. And yeah, you did touch on the point that a lot of times it's like Black women fall under obviously the branch of racialized women, but their experiences are very unique. So having research that specifically speak towards Black women's experiences is so important. Yeah, so like thank you so much for joining us today and telling us a little bit more about your research. And I wanted to know how people can find you, if you'd like to share your social media handles or tell us where we can find your research and read a little bit more about it. You can post it, you can copy and paste it in the chat if you'd like, and I can share it on our within our networks and on our social media as well.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. With the work I've been doing, it's quite easy to find me. If the videos Google my name.
Yeah, that's true. Google's a savior right now.
It's a savior. And so one of the things I'm making sure I do is ensuring that the publications I'm publishing now is open access. So it's not just available to the academic world, but it's open access. So everyone can access those journals. And so my Twitter is Duhaney1. And so folks can find me there. I don't do Instagram.
Fair enough.
But it's Twitter for me. And I guess I'm on LinkedIn as well. But yeah, folks can Google me. I'm readily available on the internet if they look me up.
Amazing, thank you. And yeah, thank you actually for even removing one more barrier by making your research open to everyone. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Thank you everyone for joining us today. And I hope you enjoyed today's discussion and looking forward to many more discussions like this. Thanks everyone. Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Patrina, so I'm gonna end this end the meeting just because I think it's still recording.
Yes.
But
yeah, awesome.
thank you so much. It was so great to meet you and to hear, honestly, to hear your, because you read it, but it's to hear the person that writes the article talk about it. It's always more interesting, right?
No problem. It was nice meeting you, and we will talk soon, okay?
Okay, take care. Bye.
Bye.